Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hello, interwebs over there. My name is Richard Morales. It's so good to see some familiar faces here. I'm the manager of cultural programs here at the LGBT Community Center, and I'm so happy to partner with Greg, Donnie, the volunteers at the Bureau that are bringing this event to you. I'm sorry I can't stay that long. We are screening upstairs in the 3rd floor for the 34th annual New Best Film Festival. Tomorrow's the last day that we're screening here, so if you want to pick up a copy of the schedule and see what's available, they're also streaming online as well until the 25th. So there's some really great films that we've watched. We had the privilege of having Esther Newton with us earlier today and yesterday for the documentary film Esther Newton Made Gay, and also a panel discussion today. So I had to run upstairs as the film's about to finish, but I wanted to thank you all for coming, and please sign up for our newsletter so you can find out of upcoming events as well. Thank you.
Please correct me. I don't know if I'm related to Esther Newton, but I like to think so. I'll also claim viewing. I am the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division with my partner, Donnie. All volunteer organization. We have Hal Lance helping us out tonight. So welcome to the launch of Army of Lovers by K.M. Soehnlein. We've got plenty of copies in the back. If you haven't gotten one yet, we'd be happy to sell one to you or more. We also have an email list back there. If you'd like to sign up for that, you'll get an email every other Monday about our upcoming events. We keep a pretty busy calendar. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. we're hosting an event called Emptying the Pews, Life After Conservative Christianity. It's something I can personally relate to, and unfortunately many others. But it should be great. It's going to be an interesting crew of people. It's from the book Empty the Pews, which came out in 2019. And we also have a great art exhibition up right now called Satanic Panic by Catalina Schlievener-Mundus. So please come check that out as well. So we're going to get started. I'm going to introduce Maria Maggenti. And it's a long line of introduction. Maria Maggenti is an activist, screenwriter, and director of the beloved indie films, The Incredibly True Adventure of Two Girls in Love. Please give it up for Maria Maggenti.
So much. This is a very different room than it was when I was introduced to speaking in front of a group of people. I'm so thrilled to be here to introduce my just dear beloved Carl K.M. So, I know what you're really getting your name. We're going to talk after the reading, but I know how long this took. I know what went into it. I recognize the world that Carl has created, which is extraordinary, both for those of us who lived through it and for those of you who have not. I so envy the fact that you will be introduced to something that you didn't live, but that will live within you after you read about it. I'm very excited just to get Carl up here and start reading his work. Thank you, and Carl Soehnlein.
Grip it. There we go. I was in a band once, so I'm not afraid of a mic stand.
Yeah.
They can foil you. Okay, first things first, I'm taking your picture. If anyone's ever done anything like this, you know what a blur it just turns into. So on video, it's not the same as the live stream, but it's the Carl stream. All right, thank you. And gosh, what do I want to say? First of all, every single person in this room, I think, and maybe there's one or two people I don't know personally, but I love love that you're all here. It means everything. Some of you I haven't seen in forever. Some of you I see all the time. There's no better way for me to bring this book into the world than in a room like this literal room, right, which we know, this building, which has meant so much to so many people, but also just we know each other, right? So this is great. Thank you. And if I don't know you, please say hello. Okay, cool. We'll say hello later. Thank you for being here. Need that. Okay, so I want to also just say a couple more preliminary things. One is this book came out on Amble Press, which is a relatively new imprint, an LGBTQ independent press that is owned by a slightly larger independent press called Bywater Books, so a queer woman-owned press out of the Midwest. They don't have deep pockets, and that means two things. One is everything's self-funded. So again, thank you for being here for something that I put a lot of time and effort into. And also just, you get a lot of personal attention when you're working with a small press that really cares about what they're putting out in the world. So that's just a plug for indie presses and queer books and the whole process that we've been through. I called a lot of bookstores over the course of the last few months to get readings, but very few were as wonderful as the Bureau. I got in touch with Greg right away on the phone. He was like, yeah, let's talk. And here we are. I mean, you've just been so available and so wonderful, and I'm thrilled. Exists. I remember when we were a pop-up on the Lower East Side. I was in that store, and I always thought you'd be a perfect bookstore to be in a relationship with. So thank you. And Richard's gone, but Richard, same thing. Once we realized we wanted a slightly bigger room, Richard was like, "Yeah, we'll put you in that old act up room," and so everything really came together really beautifully. And it doesn't always happen that way. So really, thank you. Really, thank you. And one more shout out to my current lover, Kevin Clark. In addition to being my partner for many, many years and someone who saw me through many, many iterations of this book, he also designed the cover.
Yeah.
And the t-shirts, which are for sale. I do encourage you to buy some t-shirts. Another thing about working with a small press is that you actually can have a conversation with them about what you want the book to look like. And I said, I want like a juicy serify font that looks like everything from Jacqueline Suzanne to like Dancer from the Dance. I want it to look juicy. And so that happened, and then Kevin found this stock photo, which is by a photographer named Lambda Becerra, who I found on Instagram, and I was like, "Hi, I wrote this queer book. It's about protest. It's about community." He was like, "You can have the photo." It was that simple. So it was one of those things that came together really gorgeously, and I'm just really proud that that's what this book looks like. So thanks, Kevin. Okay, I'm going to read for probably about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have Maria back up here. I hope that's okay. If you get tired, just start coughing or hissing. I'm just going to start at the beginning of the book so you can get a sense of how I welcome folks into the book and what happens. And some of you are going to understand a lot of the references, including the title of the first chapter, which is Harmony Moore Has to Die. Our voices roar. We lie on our backs on the floor of the State Senate building, 27 of us, arms linked. Our chants reverberate. No more business as usual. What do we want? Money for AIDS. When do we want it? Now. I gaze up to the lights in the vaulted ceiling of this modern concrete building. They call this style brutalism, and yes, it is the brutal world we're shouting at. Hard, square, and indifferent. The brutal indifference of our government led us here to block the glass doors of the legislative chamber, demanding to be heard. But as our chants fade, it's clear that we're not actually blocking anything because the power brokers aren't here. Maybe they canceled their session knowing we were coming. Maybe it was poor timing on our part, though timing was what ACT UP did best. knowing where to strike, and when, knowing how to make an impact. Those of us who have organized this die-in confer. Do we move somewhere else, find a more meaningful target? Our media people say no, stay, this is where the media is. I see Derek heading toward me, leading a reporter and a cameraman. Derek is my boyfriend. His dark, thinning hair is combed neatly, his shirt is buttoned up and tucked smooth. He's part of our media committee. He carries a walkie-talkie and a clipboard thick with paper. The reporter crouches, leans toward Amanda at my side, who asks her what this protest is about. She shakes her long, honey-colored locks out of her face, her brows narrow, her caramel eyes shine. Women with AIDS die twice as fast as men, she says, but the New York State AIDS budget doesn't include any funding for programs specifically targeting women. Healthcare is a right. The reporter, a pink-skinned guy with a helmet of gelled hair, shifts his microphone to me. He asks how long we're going to lie here blocking these doors. I say, people are dying while the government takes the day off. He waits for more. I'm staying here until Governor Mario Cuomo shows up and tells me what he's going to do for people with AIDS. As the cameraman steps back to get a long shot, Derek nods at me, at Amanda. We've done our part. We've learned the chants, we've delivered the sound bites, we've gone through civil disobedience training. We know why we're here. This is an action. Also true, when demands are not being met, monotony sets in. The reporters get their footage and leave. They'll file their stories while we stay on the floor waiting for the police to disperse us. Our angry chants get tedious, even to our own ears, and we become silly. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS becomes act up, fight back, fry eggs. How many more have to die becomes Harmony Moore has to die. There's an ongoing shifting narrative of this Harmony Moore, who she is and how her death might solve our problem. Elliot, lying near me, says, Albany is her second favorite city in the state of New York. The head cop finally calls out the official directive. This is your last warning. If you don't leave, you'll be charged with resisting arrest. No one moves. The top brass huddle together, muttering, while the rest of the cops stiffen and stare hard at us. They put on latex gloves. Someone in our group starts up, your gloves don't match your shoes. You'll see it on the news. And others pick up the chant, taunting, mocking, until this too runs its course. What do the police think of us? Did I wonder it then, or am I wondering it now, all these years later? AIDS activism is a new thing in 1988, but here in Albany, is this just one more routine protest at the state capitol, though campier than usual? Or are they disgusted by us, diseased faggots, loudmouth lesbians, interlopers? They stream through the crowd and one by one pull us to our feet. I feel an officer's grip on my upper arm. As I stand, he yanks my hand behind my back. He binds my wrist with hard, thin plastic, a zip tie. This is a surprise. Cuffs aren't the norm. Usually they just guide us onto a bus, but these are state police. It's night outside, dark with the streetlights and cold. My friend Dale is on the sidewalk, bandana wrapped around his long hair, camera hanging from a strap around his neck. He darts out in front of me and shouts, say AIDS. The cops and the uniformed officer at my back, pressuring the pace. I smile. Dale's flash erupts and blinds me. The cop orders me to keep moving. Albany wasn't our most significant action. That would be our protest at the FDA when we forced the government, the federal government, to shift how AIDS drugs were approved. It wasn't the most controversial. That would be St. Patrick's, when the media decided we'd gone too far by demonstrating inside a Catholic cathedral. I wonder how many people even remember our arrests at the state capitol. I remember. That night, I got to know Elliot. In that cell, I met Zach. They're gone now, Zach and Elliot. So was Dale, whose camera captured me being hauled away. Later, when Dale gives me a print of this photo, I'll note that I look incongruously happy. The Paul in the photo, smiling into the flash, doesn't yet know he's going to spend a night in jail. My light blue eyes have a giddiness to them. The lock of blonde hair curled across my forehead strikes me as boyish, which is not so strange since I've been a boy just a handful of years earlier. It's an image of in between. I'm still wearing the fraying peacoat I've worn every winter since college. I haven't yet bought a leather jacket that will be my uniform. I haven't yet shaved my head. Not quite queer. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead and I'm going to tell you that there are these sections of the book that appear intermittently. They look a little different on the page. They're called Note to Self and they're numbered. And these are a moment where the writer of the book sort of steps back and comments or interrogates the writing. Note to self, number 1. Why did you join ACT UP? Because there was a photo in the Village Voice of gay men in ACT UP getting arrested by the police. Because the text beneath that photo said these protesters, some of whom had AIDS, were angry about the high cost of AIDS drugs. They were angry at the pharmaceutical companies and Wall Street and Ronald Reagan. Because I read the Village Voice every week cover to cover in my upstate college town. Because at college, I took a class called Political Theory and Gay Politics, taught by the only out gay professor on campus. Because in that class, I learned the theory of the single ally. A voice crying out in protest is nothing without an ally. But once a single ally is found, change has already begun. Because I came out to my best friend Amanda, who then came out to me. Because Amanda and I talked all the time about politics, abortion, apartheid, no nukes, the invasion of Grenada, how Reagan and Thatcher were evil twins intent on destroying every cultural game of the 60s and 70s, how society treated gay men and lesbians like second-class citizens, how our generation had to change that. Because we traveled to New York City for a lesbian and gay student conference where I met Derek, and after that we became boyfriends. Because Larry Kramer was the keynote speaker at that conference. Because it was 1985 and we finally knew about HIV, and HIV always led to AIDS, and because gay men were the ones, not the only ones, but the first ones identified as AIDS carriers, AIDS was my problem. Because when Larry Kramer yelled at us and said we would die of AIDS if we didn't do something about it, the thing he said to do was join ACT UP. And so, our first ACT UP meeting. Suspense. Derek, Amanda, and I find our way to the Gay and Lesbian Community Center, an old school building in the middle of a West Village block. Its brick facade might be disintegrating into red dust. Inside, dull fluorescent light falls onto peeling wall paint and discolored floor tiles. Voices buzz from a room just beyond the reception area. I immediately sense that this is a vital site, but hurting, like the community it serves. The table near the door welcomes us with flyers, info about safe sex, pamphlets from other AIDS groups, contact sheets with names and numbers with 212 area codes. I take a contact sheet, fold it in fourths, and slide it into my back pocket, already staking a claim. The flyer with ACT UP's logo, clean white font on slim black rectangle, is covered with defining language. Outrage, mismanagement, direct action, AIDS. Chairs are being pulled from a supply closet, clanging open noisily amid the low roar of conversation. Take a chair and have a seat, a tall man tells us, southern accent, draping pants, twinkle in his eye. The three of us grab chairs, open them up, join a half-formed row halfway back. The tall southern guy walks to the front of the room and joins the other people up there who are in charge. They confer, they gesture, they laugh, and he faces us and declares, "This is ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. Hello, darlings, I'm Nicholas." My mother would have dubbed Nicholas a long drink of water. Skinny torso, string bean arms, prominent Adam's apple jutting from the pale, elongated neck. I deem him granola, drawstring pants from South America, sandy hair hitting his shoulders. Christopher, next to him, is the opposite, a powerfully built body under a black t-shirt with the words "Silence equals death" beneath an upward pointing pink triangle. This seems to be the group's official t-shirt. For sale on the front table, $10. These are 20, by the way. Christopher's blonde hair is military short on the sides, but fuller on top, gelled into waves. His eyes are like a tiger's, flecked and golden, almost spooky. Big Christopher offers a tiny wave. How many of you are here for the first time? Amanda's hand goes up. I raise mine and nudge Derek to do the same. Around the room, others identify themselves. I clock a black man in his 30s, 2 butch white women, 3 guys near my age, white, brown, a white older guy who looks like he came from work, a much older guy in a fanciful fedora, 2 guys with the same haircut, younger, black and brown, a skinny guy wearing hoop earrings and a shiny blouse. And us 3, white recent college grads with no jobs. ACT UP has recently staged a protest outside the White House where 65 people were arrested. I'd seen this in the New York Times, pictures of demonstrators carried away by cops wearing rubber gloves, the heavy yellow ones my mother wears when she washes dishes, and posters with Ronald Reagan's face looking demonic in day-glow color above the word AIDS gates. The report on this protest comes from Mike, who says ACT UP has demanded a statement from the Capitol Police acknowledging that you can't get AIDS from skin-to-skin contact. The gloves were unnecessary and they send a dangerous message to the public. Mike has AIDS. I know this because I can see a lesion on his neck and another on his upper arm blotches like grape jelly on his olive-hued skin. Otherwise, he doesn't look sick. He has a dancer's body, strong across the shoulders and solid at the core. He has wide, flirty eyes that I just want to gaze into, thick, walnut-colored hair, and a Roman nose. They're also different from each other. Mike, the charismatic rebel, Nicholas with his theatrical Southern hippie vibe, tiger-eyed Christopher, the intense gym queen. The next guy up is different again. Floyd, a lean, dark-skinned African-American with expressive hands and authoritative diction. He's dressed all in black down to shiny boots. His hair is shorn to the scalp and runs down into perfectly trimmed sideburns. What they all seem to share is the same riveting energy, some sense of purpose that I want too. I look to my left. Amanda is leaning forward in her seat. Then to my right, where Derek has his arms and legs tightly crossed. He might be less sure about all this. Floyd is speaking with the cadence of a preacher. We've got a chance to make a powerful impact on our people, on our city, on our community. I'm talking about the Lesbian and Gay Pride Parade. We are going to march down Fifth Avenue in force and show them who we are and what we have to say. We've got the permit, we've got the vehicle. There will be a float. Now, brothers and sisters, we need to decide together, what will we do with this opportunity? 10 minutes for discussion, says Christopher. Derek looks at his watch. He's going to time this. A man stands up and suggests a massive coffin to be carried by pallbearers, marked on its sides with the number dead from AIDS. Floyd asks if a coffin is the right image to mobilize action. He calls on another man who says he wants to see a pile of coffins on a float, one for every AIDS death. That's 30,000 coffins. We're going to need a bigger vehicle, Nicholas rolls. Some people laugh. It's good to know laughter is okay. Discussion continues. We should be stressing people living with AIDS, not dying from it. I'm imagining an AIDS garden. Cut flowers for the dead, potted plants for the living. We need to burn Mayor Koch in effigy. He's done nothing. We've got to build on the Washington protest. Reagan just said the word AIDS for the first time 6 years into this epidemic. Reagan believes the only innocent victims of this virus are babies born with it, and the rest of us should be rounded up and quarantined. The Reagan comments strike a nerve. From around the room, people hiss. This delights Amanda. Christopher says, I'm facilitating, so I'm not supposed to make any suggestions, but what if we build a concentration camp? A right-wing vision of HIV quarantine. A group of people with AIDS behind a barbed wire fence with uniformed guards marching alongside wearing yellow rubber gloves, and then Ronald Reagan leading the way like some evil mastermind. Floyd nods. We'll forgive you for stepping outside of your role, Christopher, since that is clearly an inspired idea. Next to me, Amanda raises her hand. Floyd points to her. The sister with the long hair has the floor. I'd like to see a diverse group of people in the camp, not just white gay men. Right on, Floyd says. Are you volunteering? Yes, she says, but I want to be a guard. The room whoops. Amanda is beaming. I grab her hand and squeeze. That's 10 minutes. I'm sorry, that's the wrong voice. Hold on. That's 10 minutes. Says the guy taking notes up at the table. The lovely Elliot, ladies and gentlemen, Nicholas says. I look at Elliot for the first time, the pale face, the trimmed beard, the air of watchful judgment. Elliot gives a royal wave and lets his gaze drift out across the room. In my memory, he takes note of me too, though I probably manufactured that detail because of how important he later became. Our night of sharing a jail together in Albany is still many months away. Derek nods and taps his watch, clearly impressed. 10 minutes exactly. I'd like to make a motion that we agree on a federal focus and on the idea of people living with AIDS to be worked out in committee. Christopher says, do we have a second? Voices shout, second. All those in favor, hands go up everywhere. The three of us raise ours too, already feeling included. Opposed? A smaller number of hands, the coffin people, the couch people. Motion has passed, he says, pushing a long lock of hair behind his ear. Well done, darlings. All three of us sign up for Gay Pride duty, and Amanda and I sign up for the outreach committee too. Derek looks over the committee list and writes his name under media. Why not? He says, got to do something with my useless communications degree. We step out into the balmy late May night and say our goodbyes to Amanda, who is staying uptown in a studio apartment that her father rents but doesn't use. It seems absurd that Derek and I must return to our families in the suburbs. New Jersey for me, Long Island for him, but it's only been a month since I graduated and we haven't figured out our plan. We walk to the subway holding hands, something we never do, and which I've possibly never seen anyone do back in those days when public affection between men on the streets of New York was as rare as a bar without cigarette smoke. I fell down. Good. Keep going. Yeah. Okay. The weekend after that first ACT UP meeting, Derek is staying over for the night. We're supposed to sleep in separate rooms. My parents rule. But after they go to bed, I make my way stealthily to the family room in the basement with its TV and pile of board games to join him on the pull-out sofa. We wake to the ringing of the telephone and then my father shouting for me to pick up. Shaking off sleep, I stumble to the extension. Hang up, Dad. Are you upstairs? He asks. I'm downstairs. Hang up. He clicks off. Then a male voice asks me, is this Paul or Derek? Paul, who's this? Christopher from ACT UP. Christopher, the tiger eyes and the rock hard pecs. Really? Yes, really. You volunteered for the Pride contingent? He sounds bemused, exasperated. Behind me, Derek stirs. I mouth, his eyes go wide. The parade is tomorrow, and we don't have anyone for the booth on Christopher Street. Okay, we can do that. Me, Paul, and Derek. It means you're not marching, he says, making sure I don't miss this point. Everyone's marching and no one wants to work the booth, but we need the booth man. I mean, staffed all morning. We'll do it, yeah. I gestured to Derek for pen and paper. You will? Oh, that's great. He gives me the where and when, his voice softening with relief. I slide back under the sheets and tell Derek, I think we just made Christopher's day. I'd like to make Christopher's day, he says, flashing me a dirty smile. I roll onto him, my hands on his chest, my fingers stroking the soft black fur. We are kissing when my father's voice calls down, your mother and I would like to speak to you upstairs. There is a lecture coming. You know the rules about sleeping in this house, but I'm ready for a fight. The stasis of summer is over. We drive into the city on Sunday morning and make our way to Christopher Street. Christopher's Street, we now call it. And we'll call it that forever. The June sun is already blazing. Sidewalks are filling up with parade watchers claiming spots. Anticipation hums in the air like a live wire, strong as the smells from the food booths. roasted chestnuts, baked pretzels, meat on a stick. The ACT UP booth is made of plywood and 2x4s, painted black, looking sturdy but not quite ready. Standing behind it is a guy with a cool rockabilly haircut and a bulky camcorder on his shoulder, aimed at the crowd. Catching sight of us, he lowers his lens. He has big features, large round dark eyes, a wide nose, a big smile that reveals a gap between two chiclet teeth. I'm Raymond, he says. Everyone else went uptown for the start of the parade. Are you going or staying? I'm with a video collective assembling footage as a tool for community organizing and resistance. It just rolls off his tongue. Then he laughs. It's agitprop, that's what I'm about. I want to ask you more. I'm excited to talk to someone my age about filmmaking, but he's already packing his camcorder away and hoisting a bag over his shoulder. All yours, he says, leaving the booth and slipping into the crowd. Derek and I look at each other. I guess we're in charge, I say. So we just sell t-shirts? Well, first a makeover. So we stretch Silence Equals Death and AIDS-Gate shirts over the nail heads protruding from the plywood and arrange the merch in display piles. We trade the shirts we put on that morning for these ACT UP images, and it's like a comic book hero's transformation. I suddenly have all this power. In the middle of the street, I shout, ACT UP, fight back, fight AIDS, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. Derek calls out, get the hottest t-shirts at the parade. Right away, people are heading toward us. They've heard of ACT UP, or they're curious who we are. How do I join? Someone asks. I don't think you really join, I say. You just participate. Come to the Monday night meeting, Derek says. That's what we did. We hear the parade before we see it. The roar of the dykes on bikes, the swelling cheers from the crowd. The hum I felt in the air is now a vibration moving through me. Next march the AIDS groups, the biggest being GMHC, the Gay Men's Health Crisis. So many men in different stages of illness, some walking tall and waving to the crowd, some frail and grim and supported by others. This doesn't seem like the same population I saw at the ACT UP meeting, which was younger, more visibly healthy, angrier. Then I hear them, an upswell of noise, a shift in energy, and see them. A mass of marchers behind a black banner wide as the street proclaiming, "You'll never be silent again." A mass of voices chanting the words over and over. We'll never be silent again. We'll never be silent again. Next comes the flatbed truck. Perched on the cab like a vulture is a guy in a gray suit and a Reagan mask, laughing maniacally, arms raised in triumph, the ghoulish overlord of the concentration camp. On the four corners of the flatbed are watchtowers anchoring a barbed wire fence. Men and women of different ages and skin tones stare out like prisoners. Guards in military camo, dark glasses, and yellow rubber gloves flank the camp in formation. There's Amanda. It's easy to spot her among all the tall men. I wave, but she's focused, staring straight ahead and motionless in her role. The next wide banner says, treatment, not testing. And behind this marches the group, huge in number, far greater than I'd seen at the meeting. Where have they all come from? Have they just joined along the route? Derek and I take up the new chant. No more business as usual. No more business as usual. It's all so much grander than I imagined. It's not just a float in a parade. It's a battle cry. Later, familiar faces begin popping back up at the booth, popping up back at the booth. There's tiger-eyed Christopher, long-haired Nicholas, bearded Elliot, fashionable Floyd. Christopher goes right for our cash envelope, counting the pile of bills we've collected. After you guys marched by, we could not sell them fast enough, I said. If you want to capture someone's attention, Elliot says, send Dachau down Fifth Avenue. He's wearing a suit. He was the Reagan. I hadn't realized that. It's hard to connect his animated performance during the parade to his silent secretarial presence at the meeting. Mike shows up next. I try not to stare at his lesions, but I want to know, see, understand. Mike walks directly to Christopher, who wraps his beefy arms around him. They kiss, and I realize they're a couple. Of course, the two hot guys. I wonder, is Christopher infected like Mike? I was still new enough to form questions like that. thinking of these men as infected, afflicted, other, different from me. Elliot catches me watching them and mutters jaggedly, "Ah, young love." Though he looks younger than either of them, and I'm younger still, as I size everyone up. Christopher announces, "Paul and Derek from New Jersey sold a shitload of t-shirts. I'm actually from Long Island." If you insist, darling. Then there's someone else entering the booth. "Make room for Uncle Larry, my fellows." And there he is, Larry Kramer. I recognize him right away, the small, dark, intense eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the mouth in a frown, the Oxford shirt buttoned high. He looks small and ordinary, not like the fearsome prophet at the podium, the self-proclaimed Cassandra who raised his voice to the sky. I introduced myself saying, "You're the reason I'm here. You made me stand up at a college conference and then you told me I was going to die." "Well, I've got to get people's attention," he stammers, perhaps abashed at meeting one of the young men who's terrified with his recruitment speech. "It's getting worse all the time. They're trying to pass a bill in Congress preventing people who test HIV positive from entering through customs. ACT UP needs to fight this now." "Definitely," I mutter, deer in the headlights, knowing nothing about this particular bill. He holds up a t-shirt. "So how do we do this?" "You just sell them for $10. Tell people they're the hottest shirts at the parade," Derek says. Larry looks dubious. "It works," Derek says. "Hottest t-shirt at the parade," he shouts for the 100th time. Larry joins him, but he calls out, "Clothe yourself in your anger." He's making a sale too. "That's just rich," Elliot says, watching Larry with a smirk. Seeing my confusion, Elliot explains that 3 weeks ago, Uncle Larry delivered a dramatic farewell on the floor of ACT UP, furious about the group's direction. "Furious about what?" I ask. Nicholas offers me a cigarette, balancing his own on the corner of his mouth. I'm not much of a smoker, but I take one and I puff lightly. "He claimed," Nicholas says through clenched teeth, "that we were wasting our time getting approval for the money to pay for these very shirts." He scrunches his brow and tightens his gaze as he and Elliot imitate Larry's accusations in unison. "You sissies! People are dying and you're arguing about t-shirts!" Both break. Christopher walks over and, clutching the cash, "You guys have done well. You're free to go." But we don't have anywhere else to be. Note to self number 2. Why are you telling this story? For years I tried, but it hurt too much, in too many ways. The hurt of grief and loss, which is bottomless, and the hurt of betrayal, which shuts one down. There's the hurt that feels like failure, which is really just deep-rooted shame. And there's the excess that follows success, which can go rancid, and that hurts too. Now there's this man at his laptop making sense, or lacking that, making stories from memory, this refurbished Paul, asking questions of himself, older now than those older friends who died. Why now? Perhaps because there's a new wave rolling in. The young who want to rename the world and make it new again, discovering those of us who've been waiting on the shore, something precious in our arms to be preserved. Survivors? Sure. Elders? If you insist. There's the need to unburden oneself of what's been born, to testify, to witness. Call it hope, which is stronger than hurt. Stop. Very much for that. Very nice applause.
Carl, don't break your phone.
Hello.
I'm watching out for you. Mother's
Thank you. You've watched out for me many times. Okay, we're in the middle of the screen there. Greg, I don't know if you want to readjust that screen at all, but we're glowing in the lights. Maria, hi.
Carl, hi.
Hi. So we're going to talk for a while, and then we'll make time for you all to ask questions too.
Well, that was a beautiful introduction. And the last bit that you read is a great introduction to a conversation. Carl and I are technically having a conversation about art, activism, and friendship. So here's the art, and it also has activism, and then here's the friendship. And also there's a lot of friendship in the audience as well. So the thing that you end with there is the note to self. So for those of you who haven't read the book, Carl indicated that indeed it's a first person narrative, and then there are these kind of meta moments where you pull out and interrogate the writer. So my first question, though, in light of the fact that we have this extraordinary generation now of people who are trying to make sense of the most beautiful and brutal time of our lives, is why you decided to make this a novel and not a memoir.
That's a good question and a good place to start the conversation. Oh, hello, Patrick. Welcome. Nice to see you. When I started writing this book, I think the very first thing I wrote, I was already a published fiction writer, actually. That's been kind of the path I followed. And, but I had this time in the 90s and early 2000s where I was part of a band and we had a zine. Remember zines? Like it was literally Xeroxed on paper, stapled and handed out at our shows. The band was called the Cubby Creatures, and the zine was called the Cubby Missalette. Which if you've ever been Catholic, you know Missalette is the thing you get like in the pew on Sunday. I wrote down, I forget, we had like a themed issue, and I remembered the time that during a gay pride celebration in the village, we kind of were swarming into the streets and a car drove through the crowd and we chased that car down and we smashed that car to bits in the village. And I wrote that story down. I was like, that happened? That happened, right? I'm gonna write that down. And then I remembered the time that our affinity group set off a stink bomb in the metro in Washington, DC, and lifted a banner up on balloons that said like, Louis Sullivan, who was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, your AIDS policies stink, and we like stunk up the metro. And I was like, we did these things. I need to write them down. So I literally just started writing down memories. And then something happened like very soon after where I started making characters in these stories. Just as a fiction writer, that's just kind of like what I naturally started to do. I was like, shape the stories the way you want them. Don't use the names of real people. You know, turn these events into something that's kind of sticks together. And I kind of stayed in that space for many years of like, is it a memoir? Is it fiction? Do I know what I'm doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I went and wrote another novel instead and put this away. And I think in the end, because this is a question I've heard a few times now, because there are so many incredible books coming out, Peter's book, Never Silent, which you should all read, Ron's book, Roy Bullhorn, which I'm really anxious to read. So many people have been putting out their memoirs and their sort of better researched accounts of ACT UP, and it's just not it's not how I know how to tell the story. Also then, there was a point where I was like, okay, make a decision, memoir, fiction. You've got to make a decision. And I wrote down all my favorite things about the book, and they were all the things I made up. Yeah, I was like, I really like that scene. I'm not going to do that. That character, he wasn't really based on anyone. I just like that character. And so I was like, just give yourself permission to write a novel. Like, it is okay to write a novel, a fictional story of ACT UP. And I was really nervous about it because I thought people were going to say that that's not how it happened. Like, even as I was reading this tonight, I was like, was it 65 people arrested in Washington? And I'm thinking, Ron knows the answer. God wrote his book so y'all can get the real truth. But you know, the more that like the history is being documented, the more I feel sort of right in the decision that just me as an artist, as a writer of fiction, like I should just kind of put a story together this way. And then what happened was I had like a 650-page manuscript with like 650 characters. I was sort of basing all the characters on all the people, and I was like, make it smaller, make it compressed, make these characters composites, like this person and this person. They were two different people in real life, but you need a character who can do both of those things and move through the book and we can follow. So I just started doing all the things that fiction writers do.
And that took like 15 years.
When you say it like that.
It's to say, but it also took 15 years, not because of your writing, but because, interestingly, because of the structure of publishing.
Yeah.
So you actually trying to be published is part of what took so long. Though interestingly, having read many different passes, the voice and the form that you wanted this to take also had its own growth. You know, it had a third person version, first person version, Paul version, another version. So it had a very long kind of gestation, I guess, life before it became this published piece.
Yeah, it's true, Maria. You know, we've been friends since we met in ACT UP, and Maria and I have traded a lot of drafts of the different things we've written over the years. So she's seen different versions of this, and it's true. It did change a lot. And what happened was after my my agent in New York in like, I don't know, what year was that? 2014, went out with a manuscript as it existed at the time and a different title. It was called Everybody, Everybody, after the Black Box song. A title that I loved, and which still provides the book's epigraph, sad and free, which is over from that song, which I think was kind of what we were. We were sad and we were free. My agent couldn't sell the book, and she said, something's wrong with it. I said, what? And she said, I don't know, I was ready to sell it. And I was like, well, that's no help. And so then I went to this kind of like very despairing period of like, she can't sell it, she doesn't know how to fix it, what do I do? I'd give it to people, they would tell me different things. I was like, and eventually there was just a point where I like printed the whole thing out, put it down next to my laptop, opened up a blank document and typed out from page one. And I made a bunch of changes, decisions ahead of time. And I changed the voice from a past tense voice to a present tense voice. So all the scenes, even if they're in the past, sound like they're happening right now. And that unlocked the book. And that's kind of what happened. And then the very last thing were the notes to self, because I realized I needed a way to let you know this was a book that was being written. I don't know why that felt right, but it felt right to me. How did that sit with you, the notes to self?
I felt very kind of meta to me. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not the most, like, I'm not a literary expert, but I do read a lot. And so, but it felt kind of meta to me, but I thought it was interesting. And it leads me to another question, which was, in terms of how memory works, did you use journals? Did you go back to, when we used to have things where you'd write down on a Thursday that you were going to go to an action, you'd write it down. Remember that?
A date book.
A date book, exactly. There's also, you guys, there's references to the phone tree. What did you mine? What was the kind of technically, what did you mine when you were writing this? Because the notes to self do feel like somebody writing notes to himself in the process. Was that something that came from journals? Was that something that you brought in after you'd assessed what you had wrote? How did that happen?
Well, to answer your question in terms of like how did all the pieces of it come together? So I am a kind of lifelong journaler, so there were things I could access, though I've been very intermittent about it. So certain things were not in there at all, and I was like, God damn it, why don't I have a journal for the FDA? Because what the fuck happened at the FDA, And then I would go and talk to other people, and I remember talking to you. What happened? What did we do? What was our affinity group? But other places, like there's a scene late in the story where Paul goes to San Francisco and goes to a Queer Nation meeting. So this is not just an ACT UP kind of activist story, it's also about when Queer Nation came along. And how that suddenly took off, and that becomes part of the story. So Paul goes to a Queer Nation meeting in San Francisco, and someone asked me if it was like, if I kind of like was going for like a parody of San Francisco activism, and I was like, no, honey, I have the receipts. I have that journal from 1990. And like, for example, I was very stunned to discover that, unlike in New York, when we got things done with a majority vote, as in that scene that I just read, in San Francisco Queer Nation, it was a consensus-based decision-making process, and all the activists were shuddering. You cannot get anything done if everyone has to agree, right? take a vote. And but at the time they were, and this is from my journals, and I put it in the book because it was too good to even fictionalize. I just put it right in the book. They were having, so they had something called an agenda break. So if somebody said something offensive, you could raise your hand and say, ouch. And the facilitator eventually would have to recognize the oucher, and you would stop and you would talk about it. And so they were having a discussion. Well, but my friend who brought me to the coordination meeting told me that, like, he's like, we don't like it either. We say that ouch stands for oh, you crybaby homosexual. I wouldn't put that. That's for you. But the discussion that night was to get money for a bullhorn, and eventually it failed because someone raised their hand and objected and said a bullhorn gives one person a louder voice than everyone else, so I'm objecting. And I was like, but you need a bullhorn so that one person can have a louder voice than everyone else. Tell people where to go, you know. Yeah, so it was that kind of thing. So that was in a journal. I did have some date books, like some of it was great because I had like the date books that like take off from your temp job to do the Sloan Kettering picket around the clock. So I found stuff like that. We all wrote letters, of course, so letters were great resources. And then I over the years, you know, I would come back to New York and I would have a date with Ron or a date with Steve or a date with Alan and Heidi, and I would just like, you know, just ask people, like sometimes people read drafts. Heidi read an early draft, which was super helpful, and you know, just ask questions and we would compare notes, and you know, that informed the book too. But in the end, I had to give myself permission to let it work as a novel, free from all of that.
Yeah, I heard a quote once from someone that has really always struck me when those of us who translate experience through fiction or narrative, and that was that the facts are different, but the truth is the same. So I feel like that's something you really accomplished here. Though actually the facts about the East Village and about what our lives were like in New York at that time, I don't know why reading about payphones got me so intrigued. Just remembering what it was like to have to use them. And if you'd had too much to drink, let's say, and you needed to call and say sorry.
And then you would have a little card that would have a number that you could access so you could pay for the call.
Yeah.
And there was like all these codes and access codes.
That's so true.
And they never worked. They were on every corner, but they never worked.
Yeah, there's a beautiful depiction of a kind of youth that I don't think young people will have in the same way today. Some of it was that New York was such a different city, and where we lived had not yet been gentrified. So it really had a wildness, grittiness to it. And also, I was talking to a friend recently. He was talking, yeah, there's still kids who go to the East Village and, you know, they're making their way. And I was like, well, first of all, they have to make so much fucking money now to live in the East Village. The thing that was weird and interesting and very moving to me, because you're talking about a certain generation, right? And the older generation that was in ACT UP. But this young generation, which we were a part of, everybody was broke at the same time, right? No one had money. It was not like I had a couple of rich friends or there were, you know, people who had condos or co-ops. No, everybody was in a shit apartment. And I mean, it was a shit apartment, not I mean, bathtub in the kitchen, right? Nobody's gonna get that anymore. Those don't exist. So it's very special, this thing. It really carries a lot of the nostalgic elements without being too romanticized. Though I romanticize it because that was my apartment.
I think one of the reasons why it also took so long for me to write it was to try to find that balance between like going back in time with a kind of romantic or nostalgic kind of love for this time we lived through, but not, you know, turning that into something, you know, that makes it sound like, oh, it was the good golden days when we were all, you know, it's like, no, it was fucking, you know, I remember walking out, and I think I put this detail in the book, like walking out my door and like walking down Norfolk Street, and I realized like those two guys in front of me have Uzis. Okay, so we turn around and go the other way.
Yes.
Because we were in the middle of the crack epidemic as well. I mean, there's so much going on. It wasn't all like we were young and happy and poor and it's great, you know, so.
The other thing that's very explicit in the book and really well done is sex. How did you feel about that? How did you write about that? How did you decide what language was right for these characters in this world? It's one of the more kind of notable things in the novel is how frank it is, how unsentimental, and yet there is a real romantic arc throughout the whole novel between our main character and someone else, and it is really a romance. So how did you approach that?
Have you read my work? When I read that book with the World of Normal Boys, Kevin described it as a cum-drenched novel. And that's kind of in my book.
That was just my copy.
Yeah.
You know, this is another thing about being a fiction writer and a gay identified or queer identified man, is that like I'm in a lineage, you know, like I very much feel like I am carrying a torch forward from, well, first of all, the people who were like right before me, the Stonewall writers, you know, the post-Stonewall writers, Holland and Evan White and Elise Picano and Randall Kennan and like all these people who were like, those are the books I read, and then before them Baldwin, you know, and before, you know, and then, you know, Ginsberg and Baldwin are in this book because they're still like guiding lights for me. And you know, before and goes back to Whitman. I mean, there's an erotic, embodied, sexual gay male writing that has just gone on, and that I am like, that it formed me and it is me, right? That's just what I've done. And I'm kind of amazed at either how little writing about sex there is, or how little kind of good writing there is about sex in fiction. I teach creative writing and graduate writing program at the University of San Francisco, very liberal program, queers everywhere. And I'm like, why don't you people ever fucking write about sex? Like, are you having sex? Are you having it but you're not talking about it? Why can't you get it in your work? I teach, like, this is going to be our How to Write About Sex lecture tonight. You know, we talk about, you know, on one end, you know, pornography that's only there to make sure you get off, you know, and on the other end, like medical, clinical, like it's only there so you have information, and what's that spectrum in between. But, you know, for me, it's just character stuff. You know, the sex is in the book because Paul's having sex.
But also Paul is going through like this incredible growth spurt as from boy into man. And he is aware of that as it's happening. He's looking back and seeing himself become a man. And so part of the young man who has had furtive sex and then has this loving boyfriend, and then the young man who becomes close to his own desire, right? In the environment of power and anger and grief and all of those things. It's so well done.
It was political too. And you know, this is a book, that education that Paul's going through is a political education.
Yes.
So, I mean, you got a little sense, I think, in what I read there, where he's looking at the character Mike, who has lesions, and he's like, he's infected, he's Christopher infected. And there's this like sheltered, you know, boy who's coming into this world, who's just trying to figure out, what do I know? How do I think about it? How do I talk about it? Who do I talk about it to? In which way? And like that awakening was one of the things that the book very quickly became about for me, because Paul is getting schooled. He's getting schooled by people of color. He's getting schooled by older activists who have more worldly experience than him. He's getting schooled by women who are telling him to like think about the fact that he sees everything through a male lens. You know, so all of that is in the book as well, and sex is part of that. And you know, for me, there's something very, very moving about someone who basically started having gay sex like at a time when HIV had been identified as the virus that caused AIDS, and condoms had been identified as a barrier to transmission. And I feel very, very, very in debt and in gratitude to the gay man who figured that shit out before me, who figured out you can still be sexual and liberated, and here's how you're going to do it. Discover, define, and propagated safe sex. I mean, I am so moved by that. They kept me alive just by deciding we're gonna figure out how to do this because nobody else is figuring it out, and we're gonna make sure you know how to do it.
Yeah, because nobody wants to go without sex.
Well, they're not gonna go without sex, so let's teach them how to do it right.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the garbage, maybe we go
Yeah, I
without
was gonna
sex.
say.
but-
We were young.
Yeah. Briefly before we,
Bye, lovers.
goodbye, you guys. Bye. Thanks for coming. Before you go back to your next piece, I just want to briefly just bring up something that is part of our conversation. That is the role that friendship plays in both the schooling and the creation of the work, and how this character understands himself, but also how you understand yourself as someone who came of age in this organization, in this movement. It was more than an organization. It was something so powerful. You really capture it. I don't even know the right words to say what it meant. I describe it sometimes to people. I don't know if you would ever feel this way, but I remember saying to somebody, look, this is what ACT UP was to me. If somebody came to me now, 30 years after ACT UP, and said, I need XYZ, and I remember you from ACT UP, we were in ACT UP together, and I need this thing, I would say, it's yours. That is how I feel about that organization. It's not organization, about that experience. So how do you think about that? What does that mean to you, friendship, and what we created in that time, and how it has had a lasting effect?
Some of my closest friends in the world, like you, were people from that time. And I think those friendships, many of you are here, have an enduring quality that even though we're in different parts of the world or we don't talk for a really long time, like there's something that's always like, we can get back and talk. I mean, I was out of touch with Peter for many years, and then when his book came out, we connected again, and it was like we just started talking. It wasn't hard to do. And of course, social media allows us all to find each other really easily. I don't know if that's really answering your question. You know, for me, it is that, you know, other people have said it before, you know, we were like veterans of a war, and, you know, we're like old war buddies who get together in rooms like this and like share stories. You know, my story is not that interesting. I think I've written a good book that I'm proud of, but like in a way, my story is not that interesting. I was just one of many, many people who, for whatever reason, decided, whether because we were trying to save our own lives or our friends' lives, or because we had a sense of like I described in what I read tonight, that like, that's what you're supposed to do. You're a young out gay man, and this is what's going on. Do it. We just did it. And, you know, the only difference between why I'm sitting here and not somewhere else is because I have this other thing that I can do, which is I can tell a story. And so it allows me to kind of create a container that hopefully, you know, illuminates a lot of these things you're asking about: friendship, politics, sex, the environment, you know, the times and all that. I hope that even if my story isn't exactly other people's stories, like, for example, you're HIV positive, you have a very different experience of going through the crisis than I did. But I still hope there's a way in which there's enough in there about kind of honoring the relationships, the community, the friendships, that there's something to hold on to. And there's
I think that it's transcendent in that way. It really is. I'm going to leave you with that so that he can give you a little bit more of this book, and I just want to say thank you.
I want people to be able to talk and stuff, but maybe I'll just read like one other little short. I'm going to read this. This is for you, Alan. Alan, I want to give you a very special thank you because there's so much of you in this book. And you and I did come to ACT UP together, and we decided to do this thing together. And I'm forever moved and touched by the fact that somehow we decided to do it and we're still friends. So this is I'm going to read a little bit of the pool party. Is that all right? Will that embarrass you? No. Okay. Alan is not Derek. Derek is not Alan. I have taken a lot of liberties artistically, but Like Derek, Alan comes from Long Island, and his family has a pool. He has a key to their house, so when they travel, we go out to their place and use their pool. In the summer of '88, we invite a bunch of friends to a party, and in the middle of it, his mother, Marilyn, phones. I stand near Derek as he talks to her, motioning the rest of us to quiet down. Just a few people, Marilyn. Don't worry, we're not wrecking the house. We'll clean everything up. We won't bother the neighbors. Placating and reassuring until at last he explodes at her and hangs up. He turns and announces, she says she's going to have to drain the pool. Good, someone says, then I won't feel guilty about peeing in it. And I won't feel guilty about coming in it. And that turd I left in there won't be a problem. Should we start the blood orgy? Nicholas, in earshot of the entire call, says, Derek, honey, call your mama back and ask her where she keeps her coffee filters. I'm not calling her back. Then give me the number and I'll ask her. You wouldn't. Want to bet? Nicholas, she probably doesn't even know where the coffee filters are. Jessa's the only one who knows anything. Jessa's the maid. Give me the number. I watch all of this with titillated glee. Nicholas, into the phone. Hi, Marilyn, this is Nicholas. No, ma'am, we haven't met. We're looking for your coffee filters. That's right, we're making coffee. Oh, we found the beans in the grinder, but not the filters. Oh, yeah, there they are. Kind of out of the way, no? Absolutely, we'll rinse out the pot before we leave. I'll personally do it myself. Very nice to meet you. Fun party, by the way. Bye, darling. Derek stares, stupefied. How freaked out does she sound? She sounded just fine. Knew exactly where the filters were. First cabinet on the right, third shelf, next to the wheat germ. She does wheat germ. I say, if anything's put back in the wrong place, she'll know it. If anything's out of place, Nicholas corrects, she'll get off on it. But I'll never hear the end of it, Derek moans. Well, now you're just tempting us. Indeed, as the day goes by, the boys hide things from Alan to find things like a Speedo, skimpy and shiny, still smelling of chlorine, tucked under the couch in the forbidden all-white living room. Okay, I know this sounds childish, but I ask you, what was that draining the pool about, if not the sharp stick of stigma poking at us? And didn't she once scold Derek and me with clucks of her tongue and worried, darting eyes as his hand brushed my cheek in a restaurant for our public affection? Marilyn and Fred were sensible, middle-of-the-road moderates who were not our enemies, but had not extended themselves as allies either. My parents were better on this front, but they too were only making small steps forward. We all came from families like this, many worse. A family member in an ACT-UP meeting was as exotic as a snow leopard. One night when Gilberto was giving a majority actions report, he introduced his grandmother to the room and we all rose to our feet applauding as if Judy Garland herself. Beneath our furious surface, we were starving for allies, for their approval and their presence among our ranks. I felt angry at my mother and father, the way I felt angry at anyone who hadn't personally taken up the cause of AIDS activism. Why were we fighting this alone? Wasn't our struggle our families too? Today, older than my parents were then, I understand how frightened they must have been to see their son vilified and marked for disease. But in those dark, heady times, the line seemed clear. We fought for our lives, for our love, for basic respect, without their help.
Questions. If people have questions, but oh, the lady in the second row. I don't know.
It's for the streaming audience.
Yeah.
Hello, out in YouTube land.
I'm so excited to read the book. I wanted to ask you about grief and how the writing process is potentially a part of your grief process, and how you thought about conveying that grief, the depth of that grief, or not. and how you wrestle with that.
That's a big question. I think there's a couple of answers to that question. One is, I think I suppressed my emotions for the long haul of writing this book, most of the time by being a geeky writer, solving point of view and verb tense problems and structure. You know what I mean? I could sort of make this a project that I was like working on, which meant I didn't have to feel. But when I think about why it took 15 years, yeah, part of it was the publishing industry, part of it was technical challenges, it's the biggest, most expensive book I've ever written, et cetera, et cetera. And some of it I think is like, it was all emotion,
Yeah.
you know? The book is dedicated to Bradley Ball, who we lost, and to Lee Shai, who we lost, and to my mother, who has passed away as well. And those are just some of the deaths that kind of hovered over the book, kind of like guardian spirits or muses, or pick your metaphor. I wanted to honor those people. I wanted to honor many, many more. And so I guess part of what I did with grief was I thought that I wanted to write a story that would let someone who never knew who Bradley Ball was get a little taste of him through Eliot, you know, who would never know who Lee Shai was, would get a little taste through Dale, and so on, you know. So there are ways in which the people I loved and lost are in the book in this kind of fictional character guise. And then there are other places like the notes to self where I just kind of talk about it, you know, like in that section I read at the end where it's sort of like, it hurt, just hurt in all these different ways, right? One of the things that I did to get myself through this process of writing and this artistic challenge and this emotional challenge was, at a certain point I thought, I'm writing this book for you, right? Who lived through it or lived adjacent to it or know what the fuck it was all about. But I'm also writing it for you, my niece in spirit, T, and my sister's kids, and Dave's, PJ's kids, and you know, I'm writing it for them so that they can know. And I don't know if that answers the grief question, but there was a sense that it's like, I just want this story to be told to people who won't have any other way to know it.
I was just gonna say, one thing I'm thinking about is when you love a character in a book and then the book ends, then you feel really sad. So you also have, there's another level of grief, which is that you start to love the people that are in the book. So when you lose them, you, as the reader, also feel grief. So it's, you have a relationship with your reader that is also emotional, that also plays out in the very process of reading the book.
When we leave Paul at the end of the book, he hasn't resolved all that. You know, in the 1990s story, he hasn't resolved all that. But that's also why there's that older Paul kind of constantly interrupting and interrogating us, because he is trying to resolve that, or trying to come up with more language for it.
Are there other questions that people have? I know it's hard when you haven't had a chance to read the book yet. Yes. Sure.
In the process of editing down 650 pages, which sounds terrifying, what hurt the most to take out or be out?
What hurt the most to take out? Oh, gosh. Should have an answer at the ready for this because there were a lot of things that were in there. Some of it was stuff that happened in my life that didn't necessarily hurt to take out, but it was sort of like there was a lot more about like just the work I did for money. Like when I moved to New York, I worked for the first 2 years at a place called the Collective for Living Cinema, which was an incredibly important art film exhibitor. And there's a whole story about having a link to that previous generation of experimental filmmakers and stuff that like maybe I'll figure out a way to tell that someday, because that's another story that overlapped with and was adjacent to my ACT UP story. And I knew it was the right thing to kind of just pull that out and just kind of focus on like Paul is just sort of a temp. He goes into offices and he has like, you know, you see some coworkers in different work sites along the way. But it sort of was like, let's just kind of smooth that out a little because it wasn't really what the focus was. I think I do know what the answer to your question is. There was a version of this 650-page draft where there was a lot about Outweek, the magazine that what came up from our ranks. You know, many of us wrote for it, worked for it. It was so important, and Outweek is barely in there. You know, I was publishing, not the very first, one of the first issues of Outweek. I was a regular contributor. It was part of my artistic and writerly development. We had great friends like Sarah Pettit and Mike Signorelli and Andrew, you know, Gabriel, all of them. And it would be nice for that to have stayed in there. But it just, yeah, again, it was sort of like, yeah, it's Paul, it's not Carl. It's Paul, it's not Carl. Paul doesn't write for Outreach. So yeah, I would love to see some of those other things that were going on in my own life that would like be cool like to remember.
Oh, we've got two more people who now would like to say a couple of things.
Hi, Carl.
Hi, Peter.
Not a question, just a comment. I haven't read it yet, but the readings were really beautiful. And I think you've done something that I've had a hard time trying to do when I was writing about ACT UP, and that is just bring the reader in to actually feel the ride and the craziness and the surreal beauty of it all. And that really came through in the readings tonight. It brought me back. I felt it. So thank you very much. Can't wait to read it.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. And I really do recommend Never Silent. But just being very honest, that book will take you right back to the times too. So that, hi, Ron.
We're gonna have a lot to talk about. But the thing that I know what I found really difficult was trying to convey sort of the density of the experience. And I think the way it sounds like, again, I haven't read it yet, the way again you use those sort of notes to self was sort of a way to add the layers, because I had an early reader who was like, you're gonna need to explain that you would go to a hospital, visit somebody, and go to a party. Or go to a meeting. You always like to go to visit people in St. Vincent's before you went to the meeting. How did you grapple with that?
You know, editing is a mysterious process. I think what I eventually did was I figured out, you know, what is Paul's trajectory through this story? So part of it is that Paul starts out as Derek. Paul and Derek break up. Paul moves in with Amanda. Paul gets involved with Zach. So that was kind of the main thrust of Paul's story. And then there's his family. Once I knew that, then I was like, okay, who else is sort of another story you're following through? You're gonna follow Elliot. Okay, great. You know, you're gonna follow Amanda. Great. And there were a handful of people. And so those things I just kept going back to what's their story? What's their story? And I think I didn't get the density that you're talking about. You know, I think I didn't get the sense that like this daily schedule when you're, you know, kind of a full-time activist, but you also have a full-time job, but you're also maybe the full-time caretaker of your family's sake.
No, I think you did capture it.
Yeah.
I think you did capture it. Yeah.
For those of you watching online.
So how did I do it? I don't know. I mean, this book went through 13 drafts over 15 years. I just edited. I guess every day is a decision, you know. Like I just, even when I was reading tonight, I was like, oh right, you know, you decided this. That was originally a detail given to another character. You know, now it's given to Floyd, or now it's given, yeah. So it's a hard thing to answer. It's just the process. It's just, I tell this to my students all the time too. You know, they'll write a draft and then they'll revise it and they'll be like, you know, what do you mean you still want me to work on it? I revised it. And I'm like, this is not what we've done, and it's not too enough. It's, you know, yeah. lot of attempts to do it again and give it to other people to read and have them tell you it's not working or it didn't affect me, going back and
I
going
have
back.
thought, it also occurs to me though, Ron, one thing that's interesting that you can do in fiction is because you're following the characters, there's that interiority, so you, like in the novel, you are following exactly what that experience feels like because you're inside of the character's experience, right? So you are watching him do the very things that you're talking about, and you do cover it. And it's a rather extraordinary and very unique journey, which was, and this is something that's also very well captured, which is the comedy, the humor. And I haven't read your book yet, but I'm going to, because I bought it tonight. But the humor, there was something that is so unique about it. Was somewhat gallows humor. It was also like super gay, queeny humor, but it was very specific. And Carl captures that really beautifully. There is something you can do in fiction about creating layers that I think is a little bit different than when you're writing nonfiction. And I say that as a person who's adaptations of novels as a writer, where you have to translate experience. But I do think that it is beautifully covered in this novel.
That moment when Paul is relieved that the room is laughing about needing a bigger truck for 30,000 coffins.
Yeah.
Everybody, everybody's first time coming to act up, they're worried that it's going to be too serious, too angry, too dark, too depressive. And they encounter this, how alive we are, and that we could have moments like that, and make fun of AIDS in the room.
Well, Harmony Moore.
Yeah, absolutely. That was very much one of the things about ACT UP that's so hard to get right. It's just that tone that we all somehow just got into together. The other thing you can do when you're trying to figure out how to convey certain things is figuring out, like, this thing I want to write about, where does it belong? So like there's a moment when Paul and Derek are on a bus going from Port Authority into the Jersey suburbs where they're going to visit Paul's family. And it was the summer that there was all that furor in the Senate when Jesse Helms decided he was going to make Robert Mapplethorpe like a national issue, and there were like articles in the New York Times, and I would like go back and read the newspapers that I could get a hold of, like what was going on. And so I have like Paul and Derek like reading the New York Times on the bus talking about Mapplethorpe. Like, I don't know if that actually really happened that way, but it was sort of like, oh, I need something to happen here. They're going to see the family. I don't want them to just talk about ACT UP. We just saw ACT UP. Oh, why don't they talk about something that's going on in the news? And then that becomes this exciting little contrast of like, these two gay boys in their silence equals death activist wear, like sitting on this bus, like getting really heated over like homophobia, while all these other like commuters are sitting on the bus around them, kind of like not. So you can kind of like have some fun with those kind of like unexpected juxtapositions of things. Anyone else want to ask a question, or should we just talk to each other for a while?
Well, I feel like I want to talk to everybody. But also, I think that everybody really wants to talk to you too. So we've got another half hour here. Yeah. So should we like? I'm
going to go to the back and
sign some books.
And sign books. But please come up. If you're buying a book, please support these folks, and buy another one if you already have one. Yeah, just come back and don't leave without saying goodbye, and talk to each other. One more time, thank you. I've been looking forward to this night for a very long time, and this has been really, really worth it.